The first step in piercing will be to have your design so that you have filled in all of the negative space with black. Here you can see the image in white as sort of a bubble letter type design with the negative spaces filled in with black. You will then also have to use a glue stick in order to glue down your design onto the piece of metal. So now that we have our image on our piece, what we're going to be doing is we're going to take a center punch and a ball peen hammer, and we're actually going to make an indentation in the black or negative space areas of our design, and we can drill a hole and then actually saw through the metal. So I'm going to show you that next. So now we're in the back of the room. This is an anvil on our anvil and vise table. We use this to hit metal into different shapes. We can also use it to do the center punching that I had talked about before. So I'm just going to take my center punch, put it in the middle of one of my shapes. And so this is what I'm actually doing. I'm putting it right in the middle of the shape. I don't actually want to put it near the corner of something, because if I put it way in the corner or like at the tip of this petal over here, it could actually wreck my shape. So what I'm going to do is make sure that I center punch right in the middle of each of these, and then I'm going to go take it over to the drill press, which you can see behind me, and then I'm going to actually make drill holes so that I can go and do my cutting. Now I'm back by the Dremel press, and what you'll see is I'm actually wearing my safety glasses. I definitely have my hair tied up because, again, this is a power tool. Here's the electrical cord where it's plugged in over here by the window. And I want to make sure that the drill bit is actually in there and that it's not broken, so I'm checking that out. I'm also going to make sure that I have my piece of wax with me, and of course my piece that I want to cut. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to turn the Dremel on. I'm going to lubricate it with the wax, and what I don't want to do is I don't want to go too far in. You can actually see here where somebody like really went in really far into the wax. You only need to get the drill bit in there. You don't have to push way down and actually get the wax way into the chuck. That'll make it a lot harder to change later, so you really don't want to go any farther than maybe a 1/4 inch into the drill bit itself. So I'm going to turn this on. Then what I'm going to do again is I'm just going to lubricate the bit with that little bit of wax, and then I'm going to hold my piece, and I'm going to check and make sure I'm in the right spot so that I'm in that place that I made the indentation with the center punch. And then you can actually see here that I've made my hole, and again, it's in the center of my piece. I don't want to make it in the corners because the corners of the piece will actually wreck the design that you've done. You really want to go right in the center of that black space. That's going to be the negative space that we're cutting out. So I'm just going to cut the rest of these. I really do want to have the Dremel on high. I know I had it on lower when I was putting the wax on, which is okay. But when you're actually cutting your piece, you really want to have the Dremel all the way up on high. And hopefully you noticed also that I was actually checking to make sure that I was going to go through where I actually made the center punch indentation. I don't know if you guys can see this, but there's a bunch of debris that was left over here after people were done cutting. That is not what this area should look like. It should be totally free of debris when you are done. So the next thing we're going to do is we're actually going to start cutting the piece. What you do need to do is sit at the table where there's a bench pin. So the bench pin is actually this piece of wood. I'm going to just take it out here. I'm not going to take that one out. So the bench pin is actually shaped with a little bit of a V cutout in it. And the reason for that is you're actually going to put your saw blade through that V. So it's going to go through like this, and it's going to go through your piece at the same time. You want to make sure that your piece is facing upward and that the saw blade is perpendicular to the piece that you're trying to cut. The next thing that you need to know, and I'm going to come a little bit close here so that you can see this, there's actually a piece of wire that wraps around the saw blades. What you're going to have to do is actually pull on both ends, and one of them is going to come apart like this. What you'll do then is you'll just unwrap the saw blades until you can get one out. After you do that, you're going to take one blade out, and you're going to load it into the saw. And remember, the teeth on the saw blade have to go out away from the saw, so they have to go out away from the saw like this. I'm gonna put this here. They're facing outward and they're also facing down toward the handle. So what I'm gonna do is I'm going to put this in the bottom of the saw first, and then I thread my piece, and remember we're working from the inside out from what we had in the presentation. And so I'm gonna go right in the very center piercing in there, and what I'm gonna do is go up against where the bench pin is, and I'm gonna put my hip onto the back side of the handle, and I'm just gonna push with a little bit of pressure. I'm not pushing very hard in order to tighten this blade, because the blade should be super, super tight. I don't want the blade, after I've tightened it, to be like loose like this. I hope you guys can see that I can move that. What I wanna do is I wanna make sure that that blade is super tight. It should be kind of like a guitar or a violin string. Once I have the blade loaded with my piece on the saw, I actually don't want to let go of this. If I set this on the table, I could break my saw blade. What you'll also notice is that I'm wearing my safety glasses because I want to make sure to protect my eyes. And then I'm going to take this piece of wax, I'm going to go from the back side, and I'm just going to lubricate the back of the saw blade in order to actually work. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just gonna start cutting. So I'm literally just pulling up and down on the saw, and what you'll notice is I'm staying really perpendicular. And I think what I'm gonna do here in just a moment, after I get this part cut out, is I'm gonna move this closer so that I can show you a couple of other tips for while you're sawing. There we go. So remember, you really don't want to push too much pressure on the saw, and you can see that I'm really staying perpendicular. I'm not angling the saw like this. If I do that or I push too hard, the saw blade's going to break. The way that you actually turn the piece in order to cut the different shapes that you have is you actually have to keep the saw moving, and then you're going to turn the piece of metal as you keep the saw moving. If you stop that up and down cutting motion and you turn the blade real fast, you'll break the blade also. So I can tell I'm having a little bit of a trouble, so I'm actually going to go back in here and lubricate the blade again before I start cutting. So I'll go back in here, and again, any little turn that I make, I want to keep that saw blade going up and down. And you can get really, really fine corners if you go slow enough as you turn. So here I don't have to go quite as slow, but when I make this turn on this bigger one up here, or the ones way down on the bottom, I have to go a little bit differently, and I'll actually show you what I'm doing in a moment. I just want to finish cutting this piece out. Okay, I'm actually really glad this happened too. So there wasn't really enough structural integrity to hold this, and it actually bent my piece. What I need to make sure that I do is I need to make sure that I stay inside this really tight point in the bench pin, and the reason for that is it's actually going to help support my piece of metal while I'm trying to cut. And I might actually have a little bit of a problem here. We'll see if I can, I might actually be able to do it without breaking my saw blade. Yay. So again, I want to just hold this down, and I'm going to cut that last little bit out. So you have to really think about how you're cutting in order to do some really, really fine work. And there's my little piece that just came out. So right here on my finger, you can, and I just dropped it. The next thing I'm gonna do is, now that I kind of talked about how to cut in a circle, the next thing I'm going to try to do is I'm going to show you how to cut a triangular shape. And rather than going this really, really tiny one, it's not going to be very beneficial for me to show you what to do. So I'm going to go in these larger ones to show you how to cut a triangle. Really what you want to do when you're cutting a triangle, and I'm just going to take a file here that's pointy so that I can show you, is you want to go from where the hole is, and you're going to go into one part of the corner. So you're going to go around one direction into the corner, then you're going to back the saw blade up, and you're gonna go into the other part of the corner to actually get that shape cut out. And you'll have to do that 3 times, obviously, for the triangle. So again, the first thing I need to do is I need to figure out which hole that is, and then I will put my saw blade through. So here you can see it's holding it. And again, the reason that I put it on this bottom part is it actually helps hold it because it's stronger down here where the handle is. So that's always why I loaded on that bottom part. And remember, I have to have my shape facing upward in order to actually cut what I'm doing. So here I'm gonna just put that pressure on that I had talked about before to make my blade tight. Ooh. And once I have that done, I'm going to lubricate that blade again with my piece of wax. And remember, I'm still wearing my safety goggles. So in here, and I don't think I can zoom in on this any more than I already have, but what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go one direction into the corner of that triangle, and then I'm gonna stop once I get to the very tip of it, and I'm gonna back the saw blade out very carefully, and then I'm gonna go around into the other corner. And notice how, like, when I'm really trying to concentrate hard, it's really hard for me to talk to you. So that probably should be a clue to you as to how much you really should be talking if you care about what you're cutting out. That's not to say that we can't have conversations, but you do have to be very careful or you will accidentally make mistakes in your piece. Okay, so, and a lot of times too, I'll blow the dust away so that I can actually see where I'm cutting. So there I went into that corner. I'm going to back out carefully. Then I'll go back into here and cut my last triangular-ish shape. And I'm saying ish because these petals of this orchid are also curved. There I have my triangular shape cut out, and you can see where my saw blade is here. So realistically, I did this just as a demo, but if you're actually cutting your shapes, you really want to start from the center and you would want to work your way outward. What that's going to do is it's actually going to make this more structurally sound while you're trying to cut. So again, remember I had that accident here in the middle, and it's literally because this little dangly part of the orchid was actually not supported by anything else, so the metal bent while I was trying to cut it. So here you can see I'm cutting my last shape. And then once I'm done with all my piercings, I can actually cut the outer shape that I have. So I'm just backing up because I'm trying to get into a corner again. So now that I have all my piercings cut out, now I'm actually going to just make the saw blade tight again, and I'm going to cut that outer shape. And actually, before I do that, I want to show you something. So I'm just going to make my saw blade tight. But what I do want you to see is that my hands, I don't know if you can see on my hands, there's all sorts of metal on my fingers. And there's a whole bunch of metal on my apron here that I have covering my clothes. So hopefully you can see all of that copper. That is why I protect my clothes with an apron, which you can also do if you want to. But it's also why you should be cleaning up after yourself at the end of the period. You don't want to be getting any of this metal that's in your hands, in your mouth while you're eating. So really what you should be doing after you're done is sweeping up your entire area and then washing your hands. I'll show you doing that in a little bit. So here I go with my wax, and I'm just going to cut my outer shape. So here I actually have my entire design cut out, and the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to want to start the finishing process of filing, sanding, and buffing. And remember, on this piece we're actually not going to buff, we're actually going to coat it with enamel at the end, and that's because again it's made out of copper and we don't want the copper to irritate our skin. Remember, it turns our skin green if we wear that too long. So here I just took the rest of my piece off. I'm actually gonna put this little guy, it's a little piece of copper that's still left. I'm gonna put that in the scrap bin that's over by the window, because somebody can probably use these pieces for something else that they're gonna do in their piece. So we're gonna reuse that later. Again, hopefully you can see all the copper that is on this bench pin. So I'm gonna have to take a hand broom and a dustpan and actually get that off. And if you look really close at my fingers, I know that I can definitely see these tiny little spots on my fingers. That's actually pieces of copper. So I actually have to go and wash my hands when I'm done. And same thing here, I've got all this copper that came off of my piece while I was cutting it. So what I'm gonna do is just take my apron up and I'm gonna actually go and dump that in the trash can.